Thank you all, and thank you, Campbell. That is a work of art to just trace Campbell's magnificent mind through Sylvia Plath and James Wright, everything. That was so great to hear. In fact, I was like, oh gosh, it's my turn, because I was so enraptured with his talking. All right. I think what I will do, I will start off with one of my favorite quotes. I teach environmental. It makes me want to cry to say this, though. My semester starts on Tuesday, and my first day of class is my first class, though. A little bit of solace to dampen the pain of returning back to work is that it's one of my favorite classes to teach. It's environmental literature. That's the first class I teach at noon on Tuesday in about 3 degrees of temperature. But on the syllabus for that class, what I have is a favorite quote from one of my environmental heroes, Rachel Carson, and that is the quote, "The more we can focus our attention on the works and realities of the universe around us, the less taste we will have for destruction." And I'll say that one more time. The more we can focus our attention on the world and on the works and realities of the universe around us, the less taste we shall have for destruction. One of my favorite ways to incorporate observations from the natural world is in the poetic form, the haibun. Does anyone here, have you written poems in the haibun form? A few? Okay, good. It's kind of like the forgotten form in forms classes. You know, usually we get the sestina for sure, the villanelle, the sonnet, all kinds of puzzles left and right. But the haibun gets kind of left and tossed aside. So I wanted to kind of focus on that and something as a way for you to explore or to revisit if you haven't come across it again in a while. Having moved several times throughout my childhood, from Chicago to Phoenix to Western Kansas and Ohio and more, I've long searched for a way to write about these travels. How to write about place when one feels inextricably connected to landscapes which shift and change more often than the seasons. And yet, because of my relatively brief time spent in any one location for long, I feel like I'm clover, roots plentiful, covering a great area, but short in length. Easy to remove and attach again in any given space. How can a poem situate itself without being fully entrenched? How can you make the reader travel without getting lost? Haibun is a poetic form that allows one to answer some of these questions while providing a fresh perspective through a lens that focuses on nature and landscape. Haibun combines a prose poem with a haiku. The haiku usually ends the poem as a sort of whispery and insightful postscript to the prose at the beginning of the poem. Another way of looking at the form is thinking of haibun as a highly focused testimony or a recollection of a journey composed of that prose poem, and then it ends up with that meaningful murmur, the haiku. The result is a very elegant-looking block of text, with the haiku serving as like a tiny stand or a bowl for the prose poem section. I can imagine if you're doing a series of them, or maybe even just a section in a manuscript, they just look like little flags. It's a visual delight. So in your handouts, if you can turn to 2 that I put on here. The first one is by John Sexton, and we'll take a look at that. So you'll see the big rectangle block. It's a very meaty block of text. And then you get that little bowl, the little stand, the little platform of the haiku. And I've seen that haiku placed center, so it's more of like kind of centering the underneath the prose poem. I've seen it right justified, left justified, that kind of thing. And I wanted to, I'm going to read these out loud. I wanted you to pay particular attention to that moment leaving the prose poem to the haiku and see what happens there. I chose 2 that are very different, and I wanted you to kind of check those out. Haibun. In the neglected orchard, fallen apples rot into the ground, brown squatting things like a strange congress of toads, putrid in the lessening light. I become suddenly aware of a second orchard, for the apple trees cast trees of shadow. Cast apple trees of shadow. We stand together in the clash between 2 orchards, and I turn to look into your face. The green of your eyes is the green of light through leaves, and I begin to forget all corruptible things. A blackbird moves into the dark innards of the hedgerow. His bright beak blackens in shadow. Later, you will offer me this same gift. A cat of shadow, enormous in the lowering sunlight, walks along the wooden fence, a real cat by her side. Later, I will learn to follow where they go. Darkness, your untied hair covers my face. All right, so the next one I'm going to read, I'm just going to go straight through Arrival in Tokyo by James Merrill. Our section of town is Roppongi, where 30 years ago I dined in W's gloomy wooden farmhouse. The lanes and gardens of his neighborhood have given way to glitzy skyscrapers like this hotel, all crystal and brass, a piano and life-size ceramic St. Bernard in the carpeted lobby. It is late when the revolving door whisks us forth, later yet when our two lengthening shadows leave the noodle shop to wander before bed through the Ayama Cemetery. Mishima is buried down one of its paths bordered by cherry trees in full, amazing bloom. Underneath, sitting on the ground, on outspread plastic or paper, shoes left in pairs alongside these instant rooms. A few ghostly parties are still eating and drinking, lit by small flames. One group has a transistor, another makes its own music, clapping hands and singing. Their lantern faces glow in the half-dark, black-beamed, blossom-tinted dusk within the night. The high street lamp through snowy branches burns moon bright. Okay. Now, haiku enthusiasts cringe at probably both of these haikus here, because you'll see if you're counting the regular 575, it's not happening. And then also, there's supposed to be no rhyme whatsoever in haiku. That makes haiku masters just cringe at the thought of the night rhyming with bright there. So what I tell my students, as with all forms, poetic forms are meant to be experimented with and to kind of nudged and pushed and shift around a little bit. What I'll be doing a little bit later is giving you the traditional kind of guidelines of it, but by all means, as you could see here from Sexton and Merrill, they pushed up against the boundaries of the haiku itself. Okay, you see the difference in that space between what I call that poetic whisper. I call it. I imagine the poet or the speaker of the poems to be saying, "Psst, I forgot to tell you one more thing." And then it's the haiku. But you wouldn't get what that kind of thing is without that prose poem. So they need to be connected. So these aren't two poems, they're one poem entirely. So in this case, later I will learn to follow where they go. Psst, I forgot one more thing. Darkness, your untied hair covers my face. So it's kind of, you can get darkness, your untied hair covers my face. That's lovely alone. But you get that extra oomph when you remember what happens right before it in the prose poem part. Same thing with the other one. This is also what drives haiku and haibun enthusiasts crazy. They think it's totally cheating to just count backwards and cut off your last line and have it kind of roll in and jam it in right into the haiku. But whatever. I am always in favor of pushing against the traditional forms, that kind of thing. How blossom-tinted folds right into dusk within the night. The high street lamp through snowy branches burns moon bright. At least there we get the kind of traditional haiku mention of the season with the word snowy. We get a season here, whereas in the haiku-ish moment above, there is no mention of season. So what I say is, think of it as a prose poem and then have lines that are haiku-ish at the bottom. Okay, so there's that. Though it was Basho who coined the word haibun, the form as we know it today existed in Japan as prefaces and mini lyric essays even before the 17th century. It was after Basho's famous journey into Mutsu that he crafted a sort of guideline of the form in order to plunge deeper into the aware spirit of haiku. Thus, an important feature of the haibun is not simply just to provide the writer a shape in which to jot down mundane musings of travel and landscape, but to have that sense of aware. And aware is spelled the way we have it in English, aware, A-W-A-R-E. It actually comes from the Japanese word aware. And there's so many definitions of it, but what I can share with you is that sense of aware is the quality of an object to evoke a certain sense of longing, sadness, or immediate empathy. Okay, that's what it means to have aware. So it's Basho's way of saying, like, please do not fill me with all kinds of just like bad postcard writing. I was here, I saw this, I ate this, goodbye. Like you need to pick those details very judiciously so they have that sense of aware, so that they evoke some sense of longing, loss, sympathy, that kind of thing. I also like to kind of joke with my students that the haibun is a form. I'm imagining that do you know the movie director Tim Burton? That if he was a poet, maybe he is, I don't know, in his spare time, when he's not making kind of creepy movies. I like to imagine that if Tim Burton were to choose a poetic form, the haibun would be his kind of spiritual poetic form. It's in that it's not just writing landscape, it's not just writing travel, you have to maintain that sense of creepiness, that little bit of shadow, that little bit of darkness. Okay. Someone asked, I think the other day, was it yesterday? All the days are blurring together. How do you avoid writing too sentimental? This is one easy kind of way to do it, to include a little bit of shadow, a little bit of darkness, even if you're enraptured with whatever landscape or travel that you've been. The Eiffel Tower is glorious, but there are little bits of shadow and darkness around if you look carefully. And that's what Basho was looking for, not just to be in reverie of the landscape, but to also make note of the dark. Okay. Although I'm not one to stay close and straight to any poetry rules, my friend, the poet Kimiko Han from New York City, once noted that Basho himself once criticized works that did not have a palpable sense of aware. She goes on to say, of course, and I love her sassy voice in this. Those of you who know Kimiko, you can just picture her sassy voice coming out. Of course, anyone can keep a diary with such entries as, on this day it rained, in the afternoon it cleared, at that place is a pine tree, at this place flows a river called such and such. But unless sites are truly remarkable, they shouldn't be mentioned at all. And I think that's good for all poems, not just the haibun. Again, it's a way, I think of it as like a check for yourself to avoid writing the world's most boring postcard, basically. So, for example, in the haiku of one of Basho's haibun, it's called Oku no Hosomich. The haiku itself goes like this: taken in my hand, it would melt. My tears are so warm, this autumnal frost. Okay, so let me say that one more time. Taken in my hand, it would melt. My tears are so warm, this autumnal frost. Its full effect, that haiku's full effect of aware, is apparent only when one reads the prose of the haibun before it, and then you'll be completely aware that the poet is referring to the word frost in his description of holding his dead mother's white hair. So let me say it again with that knowledge in you. Taken in my hand, it would melt. My tears are so warm, this autumnal frost. So again, the haiku can definitely stand on its own, and it's lovely, it's beautiful, it mentions the season, but you need that haibun, the prose that comes before it, to recognize this is not just about the weather, this is talking about a dead mother's white hair. Okay. The haiku and the prose poem of the haibun rely and lean on each other for a fuller, more resonant experience. Bruce Ross writes, if a haiku is an insight into a moment of experience, a haibun is the story or narrative of how one came to have that experience. When composing a haibun, there should be a palpable sense of aware inherent in the poem. Without it, as Basho warned, the poem becomes just a mundane list of travel and nature observations. Again, you want to avoid the boring postcard effect. Okay. Again, there's so much endless room for play and experimentation in this form. I've seen essays written in haibun form, and you get kind of like almost like a mini memoir where you get prose poem, haiku, prose poem, haiku, prose poem, haiku. I've seen prose, haiku, prose. There's really, and visually, it's just such a delight to see on the page, especially if you find yourself in a rut writing all these left-justified poems, that kind of thing. Other traditional features of a haibun include, I'm just going to go very briefly through these, and again, this is the traditional form. I don't want people coming up to me after and saying, well, James Merrill used the word I in it, that kind of thing. So yes, I purposely included haibun that break these rules. This is just if you're a rules follower and you want to stick to it, here you go. The traditional form of the haibun has a complete absence and detachment of the speaker. So there's no personal pronouns, I, we, me, mine, nothing like that. So if you have students or you yourself are in this rut of writing about I, me, give them the haibun and say, go, do this, do this. It gets you to look outside of themselves and into the world and into the environment. The haibun uses a concentrated use of sensory detail. I think of the prose part of a haibun like one of those chicken bouillon cubes. Anyone who's unwrapped that the foil and tasted it knows that super sharp sting and flavor. And this is cheesy, I know, so bear with me. When you drop the bouillon cube into a pot of boiling water, there's soup. It's tasting the soup that is both the haiku and the reward. It should still be flavorful, meaning imagery combined with aware should still prevail, but it is decidedly and thankfully more dilute. And the best soups leave us satiated and full, making us remember the taste long after we've left the table. Totally cheesy food metaphor, I'm sorry. Since the number of syllables in the haiku, 575, are often hard to translate, there's now, in contemporary haibun, less emphasis on getting it exactly right. So don't worry about counting 5, 7, 5, 5, 5. You know, I call it haiku-ish. If you're 4, 6, 5, I don't think the spirit of Basho is going to be rolling in his grave, you know, that kind of thing. The key is to have that block of prose and something small underneath it. Okay. Again, shortened lines kind of makes the haibun at the end. The use of some sort of seasonal word or phrase that alludes is encouraged, even when describing an urban setting. And I'm trying to think, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. And when you construct the prose poem part of the haibun, this is your chance to take risks with syntax and diction that you wouldn't normally do in a lineated poem. Try repeating single phrases or words, repeat a motif. I tell my students to include an animal doing something unexpected, like don't tell me a cat is purring, because that is expected. But if a cat is walking the ceilings of your hostel room, okay, then great, that's something, that's interesting. Don't worry about it being factually correct. Let the imaginative energy and spirit and truth prevail, okay? And again, I like to think of that haiku as just one more PS, one more chance to tell the reader, psst, I forgot to mention just one more thing, okay? I like teaching this in particular to students who claim they have never, quote, gone anywhere interesting, or haven't traveled out of the state or country or anything. And I like to teach it as the last component in a poetry course or as the last component in a dual genre course just before we turn to fiction writing. All the rules and suggestions of what to keep in mind is when crafts a haibun, make it especially freeing and fun to see what innovations the students come up with by breaking the rules of the haibun. Also, I wanted to mention, in case you haven't noticed, is that titles, those of you who here are struggling with titles all the time, that's just your Achilles heel in writing, the beauty of the haibun is that you just come up with a place, the place that you're writing the haibun about, and then add the word haibun after. So it's Delray Beach, haibun. Niagara Falls, haibun. And you're done. The rest of your mental, creative energy can just be focused in on the prose poem or the haiku itself. So it's an easy little kind of cheat, if you will, by having that. One other thing in particular I wanted to kind of focus on, and this is a little bit more of my kind of personal twist on the haibun, is that I like emphasizing smell, the sense of smell. You all are fantastic writers here in the room. I know that firsthand from my dazzling students to just even the conversations I hear in the hall to the wonderful faculty here. So you get how to write an image. You can do that. I know everybody here can do that. What's a little more difficult is rendering smell in a believable way. And I joke around. I think I upped it here earlier this morning. I think I told my students 50. I'm upping it here to 70%. I always joke, if you can render the location or objects smell accurately or correctly, I'd say 70% of your work is done, essentially. You know, and I know that's pretty bold. But I think there's something to be said that smell conjures up memory and moments in time, and it just slams you right there into the poet. More than an image, more than a sound, more than a taste, there's something about kind of just getting you right there in that moment through smell. I wanted to kind of ask you, I know this is not like a writing assignment here that we can do, but I know you all have the handouts here with me. Can you, in like 2 minutes, 1 minute, think to yourself, ask a neighbor to ask yourself, what do you smell like at this moment? And be real. What do you smell like? Don't tell me you smell like vanilla and mango, okay? Because nobody smells naturally like vanilla and mango, all right? Even if that's your perfume or your body wash, there's got to be something else. The stink of pennies, plastic from a raincoat, maybe gasoline from filling up your car. Can you render that in a few phrases? What do you smell like? I do this with my students, and it creeps them out because they've never smelled themselves, or at least if they have, they don't admit it. Can anyone, well, yeah, it's so crazy. Don't be shy. Lean over and ask someone what you smell like. One of the greatest, and I've asked this of Pulitzer Prize-winning poets, of Guggenheim Award-winning poets. The best answer I've heard was from a 5-year-old who he thought for a moment. He was the last person to answer, and you know what his answer was of what he smelled like? Chicken McNuggets and freshly sharpened pencils. And I was like, that is a 5-year-old boy so completely. And sure enough, he's like, and people were laughing, making fun of him. He said, "Smell me if you don't think so." So I walked over and smelled him, and sure enough, this boy smelled like freshly sharpened pencils. We hadn't been using pencils all day long, but he smelled like nuggets and pencils. It was the most amazing thing. Anyway, Diane Ackerman, why this emphasis on smell? Diane Ackerman says in Natural History of the Senses, she notes that we, quote, live on the leash of our senses. They define the edges of consciousness. On every other page, there's a bevy of captivating descriptions of the importance of smells. For Ackerman, breath is, quote, cooked air. Perfume is, quote, liquid memory. She goes on to say that what's amazing is not how our senses span distances or cultures, but how they span time. Our senses connect us intimately to the past, connect us in ways that most of our cherished ideas never could, I should say. I mentioned this morning, actually. You know, as writers, I don't know how many of you do this. This happens to me all the time. My friends always give me, well-meaning friends that give me blank journals, blank notebooks all the time. So I have so many blank notebooks, moleskins, leather-bound, whatever. And I have simple tastes. I just love the little simple composition books that are 50 cents. So I just have stacks of them. And I thought how lovely it would be to just have a smell journal, to just go and just have nothing in it. Don't worry about composing a poem, but just to record your favorite smell of the day. What does your child's hair smell like that day? What does your lover's hair smell like that day? What do you smell on the front porch or from your apartment building that day? What is the last thing you smell at night? Just to have a week's worth of a remembrance of smells. I'm telling you, I can't even tell you how precious that would be if I had my maternal great-grandmother, or my maternal grandmother, actually, for that matter, who's no longer with us. If I could just have a week's worth of what were her favorite smells for 1 week, as she looked out over her pineapple farm in the Philippines, I think that would be more precious to me than any ring she could ever bestow upon me or anything like that. I would just love to know what are my grandmother's favorite smells. So something like that just is something, I can't write every day. I've never operated like that. I always get nervous when people are like, you must write every day to call yourself a poet. I'd always freak out. I don't operate it like that. But I can operate on describing smells. I can operate on describing a sense, that kind of thing. So make use of those notebooks that you have there. I wanted to say just a couple more things. I have this on the inside of my notebooks, all of my notebooks, not just my smell notebooks. It's a quote from Mary Oliver. Pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. Pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. It's inside all of my journals. I think I've put it on a couple syllabi as well. And I wanted to just, conclude with this bit of advice from everyone's gruff and curmudgeon-y environmentalist, Edward Abbey. You guys know Edward Abbey. If you don't, look him up. He's very much it's like the gruff, grumpy grandpa environmentalist. Do not burn yourselves out. Be as I am, a reluctant crusader, a half-hearted fanatic. Save the other half of yourselves for your lives or pleasure or adventure. It is not enough to fight for the land. It is even more important to enjoy it while you can, while it's still here. So get out there and hunt and fish and mess around with your friends, ramble out yonder, bag the peaks, run the rivers, breathe deep of that yet sweet and lucid air, sit quietly for a while and contemplate the precious stillness, that lovely, mysterious, and awesome place. Enjoy yourselves, keep your brain in your head and your head firmly attached to the body, keep the body active and alive, and I promise you this much. I promise you this one sweet victory over our enemies, ever those desk-bound people with their hearts in a safe deposit box and their eyes hypnotized by desk calculators. I promise you this, you will outlive the bastards. And I didn't want to end on someone else's voice. I wanted to end on my own. On a personal note, the haibun is a form that, I knew about the form. I was force-fed it in school and things like that. But I came up to it later, the summer I first had children, actually, my firstborn. For me, it was birth, where I had that kind of existential kind of like, oh, will I ever be able to write again? I have no time. I'm just a complete zombie. I have no sleep. Whatever time I have, I want to sleep. And I think of the haibun as kind of like my life preserver in some ways, that I couldn't necessarily be thinking in a full-out lyric, but I could write in that chicken bouillon cube, that concentrated dose of flavoring of what a landscape is, or what a travel, what trip I went to, that kind of thing, what trip I used to do before I had kids, that kind of thing. And I found that even in that zombie state, I couldn't maybe write any other kind of poem, the poems that I was used to, but I could always manage to record a haibun, even if it was about the previous day, which for a brand new mother was not very glamorous, that kind of thing. But suddenly, through a haibun, that day became magical, shimmering at the edges, that kind of thing. And for that, I'm so grateful for having that haibun record of days, of those blurry first 3 months of just having zero sleep, that kind of thing. So coming across that time, I know was so fraught with me thinking I was working full-time, my husband was working full-time. We were literally passing the baby off in the parking lot so that we could make office hours and things like that. For me, it was birth. For others, it could be divorce, it could be a death, it could be a new job, anything that makes you just worry about, I can't write anymore, I don't know what to write about. That was what the haibun is for me and what I hope it is for you. It's so crazy to me. I'm so in awe and so grateful for the Academy. If you guys know the Academy of American Poets, if you go on their website, poets.org, they have a big list of all the poetic forms you could ever imagine. Sestina, Villanelle, sonnet, that kind of thing. They never had the haibun. And so what I find so humbled by is that the haibun was my life raft, and then they actually asked me to write the definition and the journal entry for the haibun. So if you go into that website, you'll see more about the history of the haibun, and that was written from a woman who thought she would never write again after she had kids. So I hope you never stop being curious and feeling like a student on this planet. There are always insect wings and jellyfish bells to marvel over. I know that I still need to learn all the color names of glaciers, and I know that there is so much bounty in life that you all need to record on the page. Thank you so much. Thanks.